The night Lyra Vance was destroyed in front of 1,000 wolves, she made a choice that would burn an empire to the ground. Tonight, you'll witness a betrayal so brutal it shatters a life, and a revenge so absolute it rewrites an entire kingdom. A rejected girl, a hidden conspiracy, a white wolf that should never have existed. This is the story of how the weakest became the deadliest, and how one humiliation sparked a war that no one saw coming. Stay until the end to see her final transformation. Hit like if you're ready for this journey. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see who's watching tonight. The ceremony of lunar pairing happened once every 5 years, and Lyra Vance had waited her entire life for this night. She stood at the edge of the gathering grounds, watching hundreds of wolves move through the celebration like water finding its level. Alphas with alphas, the strong gravitating toward strength, the beautiful toward beauty. Bonfires carved shadows into the forest, and somewhere overhead, a full moon hung fat and silver, indifferent to the desperation below. Lyra's hands trembled, not from cold, from hope, which was worse. She wore a dress she'd spent 3 months making, deep green silk that caught firelight when she moved. It wasn't expensive, she couldn't afford expensive, but she'd stitched every seam herself, working by candlelight after her shifts at the PAC's communal kitchen. The neckline was simple, elegant, she hoped. Not trying too hard. She was absolutely trying too hard. "You look nervous." Lyra turned. Marcus Kane stood behind her, close enough that she could smell pine and wood smoke on his skin. He was tall, broader across the shoulders than most wolves his age, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes the color of amber in sunlight. When he smiled at her, which he was doing now, it felt like being chosen. "I'm not nervous," Lyra lied. "Liar." Marcus reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was intimate, familiar. They'd been meeting in secret for 8 months. Late-night walks through the forest, stolen kisses behind the grain storage, promises made in whispers because Marcus said they needed to be careful, needed to wait for the right moment. Tonight was supposed to be that moment. "You're going to be fine," Marcus said. His hand lingered against her cheek. "Trust me." Lyra wanted to. She'd built entire futures on that trust, imagined their mating ceremony, pictured the house they'd share, the children they'd raise. In those fantasies, she was no longer Lyra the invisible, Lyra the weak. She'd be Lyra Kane, mated to one of the PAC's most promising young hunters. She'd matter. "I should go," Marcus said, glancing over his shoulder. "Father wants me to make the rounds before the pairing begins, but I'll find you when it's time, I promise." He kissed her forehead, quick, almost careless, and disappeared into the crowd. Lyra stood there, alone again, and told herself everything would be fine. It had to be. What? The problem with being weak in a world that worshipped strength was that you learned to make yourself small. Lyra had perfected the art over 23 years. She kept her head down during pack gatherings. Never challenged anyone. Never drew attention. It was survival, nothing more. But tonight, standing at the edge of the ceremony grounds, invisibility felt like suffocation. Around her, the mating ritual was already beginning. Alphas stepped forward, calling out their chosen mates with voices that carried across the clearing. Each declaration was met with cheers, with celebration. The chosen wolves walked forward, proud, radiant, and completed the bond under the moon's witness. Lyra watched, waiting for her name. Marcus appeared on the far side of the grounds, standing with a group of high-ranking wolves. His father, Elder Kane, placed a hand on his shoulder, saying something Lyra couldn't hear. Marcus nodded, smiled, looked so confident it made her chest ache. Then the elder stepped back, and Marcus moved to the center of the gathering. The crowd quieted. "I claim my mate," Marcus announced, his voice carrying across the clearing with practiced ease. He was good at this, commanding attention, holding space. It was one of the things Lyra had loved about him. "I claim—" Lyra took a step forward, her heart hammering. "Seraphina Frost." The world stopped. For a moment, just one terrible, suspended moment, Lyra thought she'd misheard, that the name had gotten tangled somehow, that Marcus had misspoken. But then Seraphina Frost stepped forward, and there was no mistaking it. Seraphina was everything Lyra wasn't, tall where Lyra was small, powerful where Lyra was weak. Her wolf form was sleek silver, her human form all sharp elegance and controlled grace. She came from one of the oldest bloodlines in the territory, and when she walked, People moved aside without being asked. She smiled as she crossed the clearing toward Marcus. Marcus smiled back. Lyra's legs went numb. Around her, the crowd erupted in approval. Of course they did. This was a perfect match. Two strong wolves from powerful families. Exactly the kind of pairing the pack valued. Exactly the kind of bond that made sense. Not like Lyra. Never like Lyra. She watched Marcus take Serafina's hand, watched him lean close and whisper something that made Serafina laugh. The sound was light, musical. The sound of someone who'd never doubted they were chosen. Lyra's chest felt like it was caving in. She needed to leave, needed to move, to run, to be anywhere but here. But her feet wouldn't cooperate, and the crowd was pressing closer now, surging forward to congratulate the newly bonded pair. Someone jostled her from behind. Lyra stumbled, barely caught herself. "Watch it," a voice muttered. "Some of us are trying to see." Laughter rippled through the nearby wolves. Not cruel exactly, just dismissive. The kind of laughter that came when someone unimportant got in the way. Lyra turned, pushing through the crowd, desperate for air. She made it 3 steps before someone else blocked her path. A young alpha she didn't know, already drunk, grinning like this was all a joke. "Hey, isn't that the kitchen girl?" he said, loud enough for others to hear. "Thought you were supposed to be serving tonight, not getting in the way." More laughter, louder this time. Lyra's face burned. She tried to move past him, but he sidestepped, still grinning. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Thought someone was going to choose you." The laughter turned vicious. Lyra shoved past him, ignoring the jeers, ignoring the way her vision was blurring. She just needed to get out, needed to disappear before anyone saw her cry, before the humiliation became something she'd never escape. She broke through the edge of the crowd and ran. The forest beyond the ceremony grounds was dark and cold, but Lyra didn't care. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs shook, until she couldn't hear the music and laughter anymore. Then she collapsed against a tree and let herself break. 8 months. 8 months of secret meetings and whispered promises. 8 months of believing that maybe, just maybe, she could have something good, something real. And Marcus had looked at her tonight like she didn't exist. No. Worse than that. He'd looked through her, like she was invisible, like those 8 months had been nothing. Had they been nothing? Lyra pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the tears, but they came anyway, hot and furious and laced with a rage she didn't know what to do with. She'd been so stupid, so desperate to believe someone could want her that she'd ignored every warning sign. The way Marcus only met her in secret, the way he'd never introduced her to his family, the way he'd always had an excuse for why they needed to wait, because he'd been waiting for someone better, someone stronger, someone who wasn't her. "Pathetic," Lyra whispered to herself. Her voice came out ragged, broken. "You're so pathetic." She didn't know how long she sat there. Minutes, hours. Time felt meaningless in the dark. Then she heard footsteps. Lyra's head snapped up. For one wild, impossible second, she thought it might be Marcus, that he'd realized his mistake, that he'd come looking for her. But the figure that emerged from the shadows was taller than Marcus, broader. And when he stepped into a shaft of moonlight, Lyra's breath caught King Rowan Black. Every wolf in the territory knew his face, knew his reputation. He was the most powerful alpha alive, ruler of the entire northern kingdoms, and the kind of predator that made other predators nervous. He was in his early 30s, with black hair, sharp features, and eyes that looked like they could see straight through lies. He was also supposed to be at the ceremony, not wandering alone through the forest. Rowan stopped a few feet away, studying her with an expression Lyra couldn't read. "You're bleeding," he said. Lyra blinked, looked down. She'd torn her dress on a branch at some point, and there was a gash across her forearm, blood dripping dark against her skin. She hadn't even noticed. "It's nothing," she managed. Rowan didn't respond. He just kept looking at her, and Lyra had the sudden uncomfortable feeling that he was seeing far more than she wanted him to. "You were at the ceremony," he said finally. Not a question. Lyra nodded, not trusting her voice. "And someone hurt you?" Another nod. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around him, something cold and dangerous. "Who?" "It doesn't matter. Lyra forced herself to stand even though her legs still felt unsteady. I'm fine. You're not fine. Rowan's voice was flat, matter of fact. You're sitting in the woods, bleeding, after running from a mating ceremony. That's not fine. Lyra's jaw tightened. She didn't need this. Didn't need the most powerful wolf in the kingdom looking at her like she was something broken that needed fixing. I don't need your pity, she said, sharper than she intended. I don't pity you. The bluntness of it startled her. Lyra looked up, met Rowan's gaze, and found no softness there, no sympathy. Just cold, brutal honesty. I'm trying to figure out why you're suppressed, Rowan continued, taking a step closer. Your scent is wrong, muted, like someone's been keeping you weak on purpose. Lyra froze. What? You didn't know. Rowan said it like a statement, not a question. He circled her slowly, and Lyra felt like prey under a predator's gaze. How long have you been taking supplements, herbs, anything your pack healer gave you? Lyra's mind raced. Since I was a child. The healer said I was weak, that I needed them to stay healthy. Rowan's expression turned lethal. You were never weak. Someone's been poisoning you. The words hit like a physical blow. Poisoning. Not weak. Not broken. Poisoned. No, Lyra whispered. That's not... Why would anyone... Power, Rowan said simply. Control. Fear. Pick your reason. But someone wanted you weak, and they've been keeping you that way your entire life. Lyra's knees went weak. She grabbed the tree for support, her mind spinning. Every memory suddenly felt suspect. Every time the healer had given her bitter tea, every time she'd been told her limitations were natural, inevitable, all lies. Who? The word came out like broken glass. Who would do that? That, Rowan said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, is what we're going to find out. That. Rowan didn't wait for her to agree. He simply turned and started walking back toward the ceremony grounds, clearly expecting her to follow. Lyra hesitated only a moment before stumbling after him. Her mind was chaos, poisoned. She'd been poisoned her entire life. The weakness she'd accepted as fact, the limitations she'd learned to live with, none of it was real. Someone had stolen her strength. Someone had made her invisible. Wait, Lyra called, half running to catch up with Rowan's longer stride. You can't just... If you go back there and accuse someone without proof... I don't need proof to ask questions. Rowan didn't slow down. And I'm not accusing anyone. Yet. But you were at the ceremony, Rowan cut her off. You were rejected publicly. You ran. Those are facts. What happens next depends on what we find when we get back. They broke through the tree line and the ceremony grounds spread out before them, still crowded, still celebrating. Lyra's stomach twisted. She couldn't go back there, couldn't face the stares, the whispers, the pity. But Rowan didn't give her a choice. He walked straight into the gathering, and the crowd parted around him like water around stone. People stopped talking, stopped dancing. Every eye turned toward the king, moving through their celebration with deadly purpose. And walking beside him, disheveled, bleeding, obviously broken, was Lyra. The whispers started immediately. Is that the kitchen girl? What's she doing with the king? Did something happen? Marcus appeared at the edge of the crowd, Seraphina still at his side. When he saw Lyra, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or guilt, but it vanished too quickly to name. Rowan stopped in the center of the gathering, and the entire ceremony fell silent. Someone wants to explain to me, Rowan said, his voice carrying across the clearing without needing to shout, why this wolf has been systematically poisoned since childhood. The silence shattered into chaos. Voices erupted, denials, confusion, accusations. Lyra stood frozen in the middle of it all, feeling hundreds of eyes on her, feeling the weight of Rowan's revelation crushing down. Elder Cain pushed through the crowd, his face red with indignation. Your Majesty, with all due respect, that's a serious accusation. It's a fact, Rowan said coldly. She's been taking supplements provided by your pack healer for over 20 years. Supplements that suppressed her wolf, weakened her body, kept her controllable. I can smell the poison on her. More chaos. The pack healer, an older woman named Miriam, went pale and started backing toward the edge of the crowd. "Stop her!" Rowan ordered, and two of his own guards materialized from the shadows, blocking Miriam's escape. "This is absurd," Elder Kane sputtered. "Miriam has served this pack faithfully for decades." "Then she'll have no problem explaining what was in those supplements," Rowan said. He turned to Miriam, and his voice dropped to something that made the air feel colder. "Will you?" Miriam's face crumpled. She looked at Elder Kane, then at the crowd, then back at Rowan. Her voice broke. "I was following orders." The gathering erupted again, louder this time. Lyra felt like she was drowning in noise, in revelations, in the sheer impossibility of what was happening. "Whose orders?" Rowan asked. Miriam's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Elder Kane again, and this time she didn't look away. The crowd went silent. Elder Kane's expression went from indignant to something harder, colder. "This is a misunderstanding," he said carefully. "Miriam is clearly confused." "I'm not confused," Miriam said, her voice gaining strength. "You told me the girl was dangerous, that her bloodline was unstable, that if she ever manifested fully, she'd be a threat to the pack's balance." Lyra's world tilted sideways. Dangerous, unstable. Threat, not weak. The opposite of weak. "That's enough," Elder Kane snapped. "You're hysterical." "Am I?" Miriam's voice cracked, but she didn't back down. "You told me I was protecting the pack, that it was for everyone's safety. But you lied, didn't you? It wasn't about safety, it was about control." The crowd was a living thing now, angry, confused, hungry for answers. Lyra could feel the shift happening, feel the way attention was turning from her to Elder Kane, like a blade finding its target. Marcus stood frozen at his father's side, his face white. "Father," he said, and his voice sounded young, lost. "What is she talking about?" Elder Kane didn't answer. He was staring at Rowan now, and Lyra saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. Calculation. "Your Majesty," Elder Kane said, his voice carefully controlled, "I think we should discuss this privately." "No," Rowan's voice cut like iron. "We discuss it here, in front of everyone. You poisoned a member of your own pack for over 20 years. You deliberately suppressed her wolf. You stole her strength. Why?" "Because she's from the Vance line!" Elder Kane's control finally snapped, and the words came out in a snarl. "Because her grandmother was a white wolf, and if that bloodline ever manifested again, it would threaten everything we've built." Silence. Absolute crushing silence. Lyra stopped breathing. "White wolf!" The words echoed in her head, impossible and terrifying. White wolves were legend, rare, powerful, feared. They appeared once every few generations, and when they did, they changed everything. They were alphas among alphas, strong enough to challenge kings, strong enough to destroy them. "My grandmother," Lyra started, but her voice failed, "was killed before she could become a threat," Elder Kane said, and now there was no hiding the venom in his voice. "And you should have been too. But Miriam was soft, convinced me that suppression would be enough, that you'd live your life weak and forgotten and never know what you could have been." The crowd was staring at Lyra now, not with dismissal, but with something else. Fear, awe, hunger. She wanted to run again, wanted to disappear. But Rowan's hand landed on her shoulder, steady and grounding, and his voice cut through the chaos. "You just confessed to murder and conspiracy in front of 500 witnesses," Rowan said to Elder Kane. "You're done." Elder Kane's expression twisted into something ugly. "You think you can just walk into my territory and—" He never finished the sentence. His wolf surged forward without warning, and suddenly there was a massive gray beast where the elder had been standing, all teeth and fury and desperate violence. The crowd screamed and scattered. Rowan moved faster than Lyra's eyes could track. One second he was human, the next he was a black wolf the size of a horse, meeting Elder Kane's charge with brutal efficiency. They collided in a clash of fangs and blood. Lyra stumbled backward, her heart hammering. Around her, other wolves were shifting, taking sides, the ceremony dissolving into chaos. She saw Marcus frozen in the crowd, saw Seraphina pulling him away from the fighting. He didn't look back. And something in Lyra, something that had been bending for 23 years, finally broke. Not in sadness, in rage. She felt it rising from somewhere deep inside, somewhere the poison had never quite reached. Heat flooded her veins. Her bones began to crack and reform. Her skin burned. She was shifting. Lyra had shifted before. Weak, painful transformations into a small, forgettable brown wolf that matched her human form perfectly. Unremarkable. Safe. This was different. This was fire and lightning and 23 years of stolen strength returning all at once. When the shift completed, Lyra looked down at her paws and saw white fur gleaming in the moonlight. The fighting stopped. Every wolf in the clearing turned to stare at her. Lyra raised her head and felt power rolling off her in waves, the kind of power that had been buried under years of poison, the kind that made the air itself feel heavier. A white wolf. Just like her grandmother. Just like the bloodline Elder Cain had tried to destroy. Rowan shifted back to human form, standing over Elder Cain's defeated body. When he looked at Lyra, there was no surprise in his eyes, just grim satisfaction. "There she is," he said quietly. "The wolf they tried to bury." Lyra should have felt triumph, should have felt vindicated. Instead, she just felt hollow, because Marcus was still standing at the edge of the crowd, staring at her with wide eyes and an expression she couldn't read. And Serafina was still at his side, perfect and powerful, and everything Lyra had thought she needed to be. The girl who'd been rejected didn't need revenge against the boy who'd chosen someone else. She needed revenge against the world that had made her believe she was worthless. And now, standing in her true form under the same moon that had witnessed her humiliation, Lyra finally had the power to take it. The aftermath happened in stages. First came the arrests. Rowan's guards moved through the crowd with brutal efficiency, rounding up everyone who'd been complicit in Elder Cain's conspiracy. Miriam went quietly, tears streaming down her face. Others fought and were subdued. The ceremony grounds transformed from celebration to battlefield to prison in less than an hour. Lyra stood in the center of it all, still in her wolf form, unable to shift back. She didn't know how. The white wolf felt massive, unfamiliar, like wearing someone else's skin. Rowan approached her carefully, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. "You need to breathe," he said. "You're in shock. Your body doesn't know what to do with all this power." Lyra tried to respond, but all that came out was a low whine. "Close your eyes," Rowan instructed. "Find your human form in your mind. Picture yourself. Then pull toward that image." It took 3 tries, and when Lyra finally shifted back, she collapsed immediately. Rowan caught her before she hit the ground, supporting her weight like she was made of paper. "Easy," he said. "Your body just went through hell." Lyra's entire frame shook. Her muscles felt like they'd been set on fire and rebuilt from scratch. Everything hurt, but underneath the pain was something else. Strength. Real, undeniable strength. "What happens now?" Lyra managed, her voice barely a whisper. Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Now you decide what kind of wolf you want to be." Before Lyra could ask what that meant, Marcus appeared at the edge of her vision. He looked terrible, pale, shaken, like his entire world had just collapsed, which Lyra supposed it had. His father was being dragged away in chains, his perfect ceremony was ruined, and the girl he'd rejected had turned into something powerful enough to make a king pay attention. "Lyra," Marcus started, and his voice cracked. "I didn't know. You have to believe me. I didn't know what he was doing." "Don't!" Lyra pulled away from Rowan's support, forced herself to stand on her own, even though her legs were shaking. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Pretend you care now that I'm useful." The words came out colder than Lyra expected, but she didn't take them back. "You didn't choose me when you thought I was weak. You don't get to claim me now that I'm not." Marcus flinched like she'd struck him. "That's not fair. I was following my father's advice." "You were following your own ambition," Lyra cut him off. "And that's fine. I understand it now. But don't stand there and act like you're the victim." She turned away from him, and it felt like severing something vital. 8 months of her life, and it ended here, not with tears or screaming, but with cold, final indifference. Marcus didn't follow her. Rowan was watching the exchange with an expression Lyra couldn't read. When she met his eyes, he said, "You'll need somewhere to stay while the investigation continues. Your pack house isn't safe." Lyra hadn't even thought about that. Hadn't thought about anything beyond the next breath, the next moment. I don't, she started. You'll stay at the Capitol, Rowan said, not really asking, under my protection, until we figure out the full extent of this conspiracy. It wasn't a request, but somehow it didn't feel like a command either, just a fact. The next step in a future Lyra hadn't planned for. She nodded, too exhausted to argue. Around them, the ceremony grounds were emptying. Wolves dispersed in small groups, whispering frantically. Tomorrow, the whole territory would know. The kitchen girl. The white wolf. The conspiracy that had been hiding in plain sight for 23 years. Lyra was never going to be invisible again. She wasn't sure if that was victory or just a different kind of trap, but as Rowan gestured for her to follow him toward the waiting carriages, as the moon continued its arc across the sky, Lyra made herself a promise. She would find every wolf who'd been part of this, every person who'd known what Elder Cain was doing and stayed silent, every system that had allowed this to happen, and she would burn it all down, not for revenge, for justice. The girl who'd been rejected at the ceremony was gone. In her place stood something harder, something dangerous, something the world had tried to bury and failed. Lyra Vance looked back one last time at the ceremony grounds, at Marcus standing alone, at the dispersing crowd, at the place where her old life had ended. Then she turned away and didn't look back again. The capital was nothing like the frontier territory Lyra had grown up in. Where her pack's settlement had been rough timber and practical stone, the royal city sprawled across the valley in layers of white marble and dark iron. Buildings climbed the hillsides like they were trying to reach the sky. Guards stood at every corner, wearing armor that probably cost more than Lyra had earned in her entire life. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, wolves moved with the kind of confidence that came from never questioning whether they belonged. Lyra sat in the back of Rowan's carriage and felt like an imposter. 3 days had passed since the ceremony. 3 days of travel, of sleeping in fine inns where the staff looked at her like they couldn't figure out what she was doing with the king's entourage. 3 days of Rowan's guards treating her with careful respect that felt more like suspicion. 3 days of her body still aching from the transformation, from 23 years of poison being burned away all at once. "You're staring," Rowan said from across the carriage. Lyra blinked, realized she'd been watching the city pass by with what must have looked like rural terror. "I've never been here before." "I know." Rowan didn't elaborate. He'd been like that the entire trip, direct, economical with words, revealing nothing unless directly asked. It should have been intimidating, but Lyra found it almost comforting. At least he wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't. The carriage stopped in front of a fortress that made Lyra's breath catch. The royal palace wasn't beautiful, it was brutal. All sharp angles and thick walls and towers that looked built for war, not ceremony. Guards flanked the entrance, their expressions blank and professional. "This is home," Rowan said, stepping out of the carriage. He offered Lyra his hand. She took it, hating how her fingers trembled. Inside, the palace was colder than she expected. Stone floors, high ceilings, tapestries that depicted battles Lyra didn't recognize. Servants moved through the halls like ghosts. Silent, efficient, invisible until you needed them. Rowan led her through a maze of corridors until they reached a door guarded by 2 wolves in dark uniforms. "This is your room," Rowan said. "Mine is down the hall if you need anything. We'll start the investigation tomorrow." Lyra stared at the door. "What am I supposed to do until then?" "Rest. Recover. Your body's still adjusting." Rowan paused, then added, "And try not to shift again until we've trained you properly. A white wolf losing control in the palace would be, problematic." He left before Lyra could ask what that meant. The room was bigger than the entire house Lyra had grown up in. A massive bed dominated one wall, covered in furs that looked expensive. Windows overlooked the city, offering a view that probably would have been stunning if Lyra's chest hadn't felt so tight. She sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe. 3 days ago, she'd been nobody. A kitchen worker. A rejected girl running through the forest in a torn dress. Now she was, what? A white wolf? A victim of conspiracy? A guest of the king? None of it felt real. Lyra lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally dragged her under. Oh, she woke to someone pounding on her door. Lyra jerked upright, heart hammering, momentarily lost. The room was dark except for pale dawn light filtering through the windows. She'd slept in her clothes, and they were wrinkled and uncomfortable. The pounding continued. "What?" Lyra called, her voice rough. "Training starts in 20 minutes, a woman's voice answered from the other side of the door. "King's orders, don't be late." Footsteps retreated before Lyra could respond. She found clothes laid out on a chair she hadn't noticed the night before. Simple training gear in dark gray, well made, but practical. Someone had come in while she was sleeping, and she hadn't even woken up. The thought made her skin crawl. Lyra dressed quickly and followed the sounds of activity until she found herself in a massive courtyard behind the palace. At least 30 wolves were already there, running drills in the early morning light. They moved like dancers, synchronized, powerful, completely in control of their bodies. Lyra had never felt more out of place. "You're late," Rowan said from behind her. Lyra spun. "Your guard said 20 minutes. That was 22 minutes ago." Rowan gestured toward the training grounds. "Come on." He led her to a section of the courtyard away from the main group, where a woman waited with her arms crossed. She was probably in her 40s, built like she could break rocks with her bare hands, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe braid. "This is Commander Vex," Rowan said. "She runs the Royal Guard. She's going to teach you how to use your wolf without killing yourself or anyone else." Vex looked Lyra up and down with an expression that suggested she wasn't impressed. "The White Wolf," she said flatly. "Great. Another legend who doesn't know how to fight." "I can fight," Lyra said, bristling. "You can brawl," Vex corrected. "There's a difference. Shift for me." Lyra hesitated. She still wasn't sure how she'd managed the transformation at the ceremony. It had felt like being torn apart and rebuilt, and the memory made her nauseous. "Now," Vex added, and it wasn't a request. Lyra closed her eyes and reached for that place inside where her wolf lived. For 23 years, it had been a small, quiet thing, barely there. Now it felt enormous, filling every space inside her chest, demanding to be released. The shift hurt less than the first time, but it was still violent. Bones cracked, skin burned. When it finished, Lyra stood on 4 legs, panting, her white fur gleaming in the morning sun. "Good," Vex said, circling her. "Now shift back." That was harder. Lyra's wolf didn't want to retreat, didn't want to be buried again. It took several minutes of struggling before she finally managed to pull herself back into human form, collapsing on her hands and knees. "Pathetic," Vex said without heat. "You're fighting yourself. The wolf isn't separate from you. It's you. Until you understand that, you're going to keep struggling." "I just shifted twice," Lyra gasped. "How is that pathetic?" "Because it should be effortless." Vex grabbed Lyra's arm, hauled her to her feet. "Again. And this time stop treating your wolf like an enemy." They spent the next 3 hours drilling transformations until Lyra wanted to scream. Shift, return, shift, return. Over and over until the world started spinning and her body felt like it was made of broken glass. Finally, Vex called a halt. "You're done for today," she said. "Tomorrow, we'll work on control. Right now, you're a disaster waiting to happen." Lyra didn't have the energy to be offended. She just nodded and stumbled back toward the palace, every muscle screaming. She made it halfway across the courtyard before she heard the whispers. A group of younger wolves stood near the training grounds, watching her pass. They weren't trying to be subtle about their conversation. "That's her? Doesn't look like much. I heard she couldn't even shift properly until a few days ago." "White wolf or not, she's still just a frontier nobody." Lyra kept walking, jaw tight, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction, but their words burrowed under her skin anyway. Rowan found her an hour later in the palace library, a massive room lined with books Lyra couldn't read. She'd never learned, had never needed to in the pack kitchen. Just one more thing that marked her as different here. "Vex says you did well," Rowan said, settling into a chair across from her. Lyra laughed bitterly. "She called me pathetic. She calls everyone pathetic. It's a compliment coming from her." Rowan studied her for a moment. "You're angry." "I'm tired." Lyra picked at a loose thread on her training clothes. "And I don't belong here. Everyone knows it." "You're right. You don't belong here." Lyra's head snapped up. "You belong in a pack that valued you," Rowan continued, his voice matter of fact. "You belong in a life that wasn't stolen from you. But we don't get to choose where we belong. We only get to choose what we do about it. That's not helpful. It's not supposed to be helpful. It's supposed to be true. Rowan leaned forward. The investigation starts tomorrow. We have 3 confirmed cases of suppression beyond yours, all young wolves from families Elder Kane considered threats. All of them poisoned, just like you. All of them kept weak. Lyra's stomach turned. 3 others? That we know of. There could be more. Rowan's expression hardened. Elder Kane wasn't working alone. We need to find everyone involved, which means we need to go back to your territory and start asking questions people won't want to answer. They're not going to talk to me, Lyra said. They never did before. They're definitely not going to now. They'll talk to their queen. The words hit like cold water. I'm not, Lyra started. You're a white wolf, Rowan interrupted. Your bloodline predates every current alpha in the Northern Territories. Technically, you outrank most of them, including me. That's insane. That's politics. Rowan stood, moved to the window overlooking the city. Elder Kane tried to bury your line because he knew what it meant. A white wolf doesn't just challenge the hierarchy. They redefine it. People are going to fear you, Lyra. Some are going to try to use you. Others are going to try to kill you. Lyra's hands clenched. So what am I supposed to do? You become stronger than all of them. Rowan turned back to face her. You learn to fight, to lead, to survive, and then you decide what kind of leader you want to be. I don't want to be a leader. Too bad. There was no sympathy in Rowan's voice. You already are. Tarat. They left for Lyra's home territory at dawn the next day. The journey back felt different than the journey to the capital. Shorter, maybe, or just more fraught with dread. Lyra sat in the carriage beside Rowan while Commander Vex rode ahead with a squad of royal guards. What happens if they refuse to cooperate? Lyra asked, as familiar landmarks started appearing outside the window. They won't refuse, Rowan said. Not publicly. But they'll lie. They'll hide evidence. They'll protect their own. That's where you come in. Me? You know these people. You know their tells, their habits. You'll know when they're lying. Lyra wasn't sure about that, but she didn't argue. They reached the packed settlement by mid-afternoon. The entire place looked smaller than Lyra remembered, rougher, more worn. Wolves stopped what they were doing to watch the royal carriage pass, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Marcus stood on the steps of the pack hall, dressed formally like he was receiving foreign dignitaries rather than the girl he'd rejected 4 days ago. Rowan stepped out of the carriage first, and the crowd that had gathered immediately bowed. Not out of respect, Lyra suspected. Out of fear. Then Lyra stepped out, and the whispers erupted. That's her. The White Wolf. Can't believe she came back. Look at her, acting like she's royalty now. Lyra forced herself to stand straight, to meet their stares without flinching. She wore clothes provided by the palace. Fine fabric, well-tailored, nothing like the simple dresses she'd worn working in the kitchen. She looked like she belonged with Rowan's entourage. She felt like a fraud. Marcus descended the steps, his expression carefully neutral. Your Majesty, welcome back. We weren't expecting... I don't care what you were expecting, Rowan cut him off. We're here to continue the investigation. You'll provide full access to your pack records, your healer's notes, and anyone I want to question. Marcus's jaw tightened. Of course, though I should mention that in my father's absence, I'm currently serving as acting elder. Not anymore. The voice came from behind Lyra. She turned to see an older woman emerging from the crowd, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, wearing the formal robes of a council member. Elder Vera, Marcus said, and his voice carried a warning. This isn't the time. This is exactly the time, Vera said calmly. She looked at Rowan. The council met yesterday. Given Elder Kane's situation, we've appointed interim leadership. I'll be handling all official matters until proper succession is determined. Marcus's face went red. The council has no authority to... The council has every authority, Vera interrupted, especially when the previous elder's son is under investigation for potential complicity. I wasn't complicit. Marcus's composure finally cracked. I didn't know what my father was doing. That remains to be seen, Rowan said. His tone was flat, final. Which is why you'll be questioned along with everyone else. The crowd was growing, wolves pressing in from all sides to witness the confrontation. Lyra spotted familiar faces, people she'd worked alongside in the kitchens, hunters she'd served meals to, families she'd grown up around. None of them looked happy to see her. Lyra! a voice called from the crowd. She turned to see Sarah, one of the other kitchen workers, pushing forward. They'd been friends once, or as close to friends as Lyra had been allowed. "Is it true?" Sarah asked, and her voice was too loud, meant to be heard by everyone. "Did you really seduce the king to get revenge on Marcus?" The courtyard went silent. Lyra felt her face go hot. "What? No." "That's what everyone's saying," Sarah continued, and there was something cruel in her expression now. "That you couldn't get Marcus, so you went after someone with more power. That all of this, the investigation, the accusations, it's just you trying to destroy the pack because you got rejected." "That's not—" Lyra started, but her voice came out too defensive, too weak. "Enough," Rowan said, and his voice carried authority that made everyone freeze. "Lyra is here as a witness, not as your entertainment. The next person who questions her integrity answers to me personally." Sarah paled and backed into the crowd. But the damage was done. Lyra could see it in the eyes around her. Doubt, suspicion, contempt. They'd decided she was a scorned girl out for revenge, and nothing Rowan said was going to change that. "Let's get started," Rowan said to Vex. Then to Lyra, quieter, "Stay close. This is going to get worse before it gets better." He wasn't wrong. The pack hall was exactly as Lyra remembered. Rough wooden tables, a central fireplace, walls covered with trophies from hunts. It smelled like smoke and old meat and pack politics. Rowan set up operations in the main chamber, with Vex organizing interviews and Elder Vera providing records. Lyra sat off to the side trying to be useful, mostly feeling invisible again. The first interviews were with the pack's senior members. One by one they came in, sat across from Rowan, and swore they knew nothing about Elder Kane's conspiracy. They were shocked, horrified, completely blindsided. They were all lying. Lyra could see it in the way they avoided eye contact, in the careful phrasing of their answers, in the pauses that lasted just a beat too long. These were people who'd known exactly what was happening. Maybe they hadn't ordered the poisoning themselves, but they'd known. And they'd done nothing. "This is useless," Vex muttered during a break between interviews. "They're protecting each other. We're not going to get anything real." "We will," Rowan said. "We just need the right leverage." He looked at Lyra. "No," she said immediately. "You know them. You know their secrets." "I was a kitchen worker. I didn't have secrets." "But you heard them." Rowan's eyes were sharp. "People talk around servants like they're furniture. You must have heard things." Lyra wanted to deny it, but he was right. She'd spent years being invisible, and invisible people heard everything. Fights between mates, affairs, debts, grudges. The private ugliness that people hid behind public faces. "If I tell you," Lyra said slowly, "they'll know it came from me. They already hate me. This will make it worse." "They're going to hate you anyway," Rowan said. "At least this way, their hatred means something." It was brutal logic, but Lyra couldn't argue with it, so she started talking. She told Rowan about the hunter who'd been stealing from pack supplies to pay gambling debts, about the council member having an affair with a married beta, about the families who'd been taking bribes to look the other way on territory disputes. With each revelation, Rowan's questions became sharper, more targeted, and the wolves being interviewed started cracking. By evening, they had 3 confessions, pack members who'd known about the suppression and stayed silent. Not because they supported it, they claimed, just because they were afraid. "Cowards," Vex said with disgust after the last one left. "Useful cowards," Rowan corrected. "They gave us names, people who were directly involved in maintaining the poisoning operation." "Let me guess," Lyra said. "More respected pack members, 2 healers, and a council member." Rowan stood, stretched. "We'll bring them in tomorrow. For now, everyone needs rest." But rest wasn't what Lyra got. She'd been given a room in the pack house, her old room, actually, which felt like some kind of joke. It was tiny, barely big enough for a bed and a trunk, and it smelled like mildew and old memories. Lyra lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of the pack settling for the night, and tried not to think about how much she hated being back here. Someone knocked on her door. Lyra sat up. "Who is it?" "It's me. Marcus." Lyra's first instinct was to tell him to leave, but curiosity won out. She opened the door. Marcus looked terrible, exhausted, hollow-eyed, like he hadn't slept since the ceremony. He'd changed out of his formal clothes into something simpler, and it made him look younger. more like the person Lyra had thought she knew. "What do you want?" Lyra asked. "To apologize." "You already tried that." "Not really." Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "At the ceremony, I didn't know what to say. Everything was chaos. But I've been thinking about what you said, and you were right. I was following my own ambition. I chose Serafina because she made sense politically, because my father pushed for it, because it was safe. And I'm sorry." Marcus met her eyes. "I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to choose you. I'm sorry I let you believe we had a future when I was already planning something else. You deserve better than that." Lyra waited for the apology to mean something, to feel like vindication or closure or satisfaction. It just felt empty. "Okay," she said. Marcus blinked. "Okay?" "Yeah, okay. You're sorry. I heard you." Lyra leaned against the doorframe. "But that doesn't change anything, does it? You still chose her. Your father still poisoned me for 23 years. This pack still would have let me die weak and forgotten if Rowan hadn't intervened. That's not fair, I'd say. It's completely fair." Lyra felt something hard settling in her chest. "You want me to forgive you so you can feel better, but I don't care about making you feel better anymore, Marcus. I have bigger problems." Marcus's expression shifted, hurt, then anger. "You've changed." "I got stronger. That's not the same as changing." "You used to be kind." "I used to be desperate," Lyra corrected. "Don't confuse the two." She started to close the door, but Marcus grabbed the frame. "They're saying you're sleeping with the king," he said, and his voice was low, vicious. "Is that true?" Lyra stared at him. "Get your hand off my door." "Is it true?" "It's none of your business." "So it is true." Marcus's face twisted. "You really did seduce him. That's how you got all of this. The investigation, the attention, the power. You traded your body for it." The slap happened before Lyra even realized she'd moved. Marcus stumbled back, hand flying to his reddening cheek. "I didn't trade anything," Lyra said, and her voice was shaking with rage. "Rowan exposed your father's conspiracy because it was the right thing to do. Because people were being hurt. The fact that you can't imagine someone helping me without expecting sex in return says everything about you and nothing about me." "Lyra, get out." Marcus hesitated, then turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Lyra slammed the door and locked it. Then she sat on the edge of her bed and tried to breathe through the fury that was making her hands shake. She wanted to shift, to run, to tear something apart with her teeth. Wanted to go back to the ceremony grounds and scream at every person who'd watched her get rejected and laughed. But that wasn't going to help. Nothing was going to help except finishing what they'd started. The next day brought worse revelations. The two healers confessed immediately when confronted. They'd been preparing the suppression tonics for years, following Elder Kane's instructions, too afraid of his power to refuse. They provided detailed records, names, dosages, dates. 17 wolves. 17 pack members had been systematically poisoned, their strength stolen, their potential destroyed. Some were still alive, like Lyra, living diminished lives and believing it was natural. Others had died young, their bodies unable to handle the constant poisoning. The council member tried to run. Vex's guards caught him before he made it to the forest. He fought, shifted, tried to kill one of the soldiers. They subdued him with brutal efficiency. When Rowan questioned him, he spat in the king's face and screamed that they were destroying the pack, that this was all Lyra's fault, that she was a curse brought down on them all. Rowan didn't flinch. He just had the man dragged away to await trial. By midday, the pack was in chaos. Families of the poisoned wolves were demanding justice. Others were calling for Lyra to be exiled, claiming she'd brought shame to the territory. Fights broke out in the streets. The atmosphere felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. And then someone tried to kill Lyra. She was walking back to the pack house after an interview, flanked by two of Rowan's guards, when a wolf burst from an alley with a knife. Everything happened fast. The guards moved to intercept, but the attacker was quick, impossibly quick. The blade flashed toward Lyra's throat. She shifted without thinking. 1 second she was human, vulnerable, about to die. The next she was a white wolf, massive and furious, and her jaws closed around the attacker's wrist before the knife could connect. Bone crunched. The attacker screamed. Lyra threw him aside, and he hit the wall hard enough to crack stone. The guards had their weapons drawn, but it was already over. The attacker lay crumpled against the wall, unconscious, his arm mangled. Lyra shifted back to human form, breathing hard, her heart hammering. "Are you hurt?" one of the guards asked. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. A crowd had gathered, staring at her with expressions ranging from fear to awe to pure hatred. "Murderer!" someone hissed from the back of the crowd. "She attacked him." "Self-defense," the guard said loudly. "He came at her with a weapon. We all saw it." But the crowd didn't disperse. They just kept staring, and Lyra realized with sick certainty that it didn't matter what the truth was. They'd already decided she was the villain in this story. Rowan appeared moments later, moving through the crowd with Vex at his side. He took one look at the unconscious attacker, then at Lyra. "Inside," he said. "Now!" Lyra followed him into the pack house, her body still shaking from the adrenaline, from the shift, from how close she'd come to dying. Rowan led her to a private room and closed the door. "That was sloppy," he said. Lyra's temper flared. "He tried to kill me, and you gave them exactly what they wanted. Proof that you're dangerous." Rowan's voice was hard. "That crowd is going to spread the story. By nightfall, everyone will believe you're a monster who attacked an innocent pack member." "He had a knife." "It doesn't matter." Rowan moved to the window, looked out at the settlement. "You're a white wolf. People are going to see what they want to see, and right now they want to see a threat." Lyra slumped into a chair. "So what am I supposed to do? Let them kill me?" "No, you're supposed to be smarter than they are." Rowan turned back to her. "This attack wasn't random. Someone sent him, someone who wants you dead or discredited or both. We need to find out who." "It could be anyone," Lyra said bitterly. "Half the pack hates me, but only a few have the resources to organize an assassination." Rowan's eyes were calculating. "We start with the families, the ones who lost power when Elder Kane was arrested. Someone's scared, and scared people make mistakes." He was right, but it didn't make Lyra feel any safer. That night, lying in her too small bed in her too familiar room, Lyra finally let herself cry. Not from sadness, from exhaustion, from rage, from the sheer impossibility of everything that had happened in the past week. She'd wanted power, wanted to matter. She'd gotten both, and they felt like prisons. Somewhere in the darkness, her wolf stirred, restless and angry. It wanted to run, wanted to fight, wanted to burn this entire place down and never look back. For the first time, Lyra understood the feeling completely. Tomorrow, they'd continue the investigation. They'd find more conspirators, uncover more crimes, watch more of her former pack tear itself apart. And Lyra would stand in the center of it all, hated and feared, exactly as powerful as she'd always wanted to be, exactly as alone. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing the nightmares were waiting. The nightmares were waiting, but they wore familiar faces. Lyra woke before dawn to the sound of shouting outside. She dragged herself to the window and looked down at the street below, where a crowd had already gathered despite the early hour. They weren't celebrating, they were protesting. Signs had appeared overnight, crude things painted on scrap wood. "White wolf equals death." "Lyra the liar." "Protect our pack." Someone had organized this, someone wanted her to see it. Lyra dressed quickly and headed downstairs, where she found Rowan already awake, standing at the window of the main hall with a cup of something that smelled like coffee, but probably wasn't. "They've been out there for an hour," he said without turning around. "Vex wanted to disperse them. I told her to wait." "Why?" Lyra moved to stand beside him. The crowd had grown, maybe 50 wolves now, some holding torches even though the sun was rising. "Because fear is useful information." Rowan finally looked at her. "Someone's stoking this. Someone with resources and influence. They're trying to force us out before we can dig any deeper. It's working. Only if we let it." Rowan set down his cup. "Get ready. We're calling a pack assembly. Everyone who's not actively trying to kill you needs to hear the truth." "They won't believe the truth," Lyra said. "They've already decided I'm the problem." "Then we give them something they can't ignore." The assembly was called for noon in the central square where pack business had been conducted for generations. By the time Lyra arrived with Rowan and his guards, the entire territory seemed to have turned out. Hundreds of wolves packed into the space, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Elder Vera stood on the raised platform at the center, looking grim. Marcus was there too, standing off to the side with Serafina. He wouldn't meet Lyra's eyes. Rowan climbed the platform without ceremony, and the crowd quieted. Not out of respect, out of caution. You didn't interrupt a king, even one you resented. We've completed the initial investigation, Rowan said, his voice carrying across the square. What we've found is worse than anyone anticipated. Elder Kane didn't act alone. He had help from multiple pack members, healers, council members, even some of your hunters. Together, they poisoned 17 wolves over the course of 20 years. Some survived, others didn't. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Rowan continued without pause. The survivors are here today. They deserve to be seen. He gestured to the side of the platform where a group of wolves stood together, thin, weak-looking, their postures screaming vulnerability. Lyra recognized some of them. A young man who'd worked in the stables. A woman who'd been a scout before an injury forced her to retire early. People she'd passed 100 times without really seeing. People just like her. These wolves were targeted because their bloodlines posed a threat to Elder Kane's power structure, Rowan said. They were systematically weakened, their potential destroyed, their lives stolen. And the pack allowed it to happen. That's not fair, someone shouted from the crowd. We didn't know. You didn't want to know, Rowan corrected, and his voice went cold. 17 wolves suffered for decades, and not one person thought to question why so many from specific families were weak, why they all needed the same healer's care. You didn't ask because it was easier not to. The crowd shifted uneasily. Lyra could see the denial on their faces, the refusal to accept responsibility. Then Elder Vera stepped forward. The king is right, she said, and her voice was heavy with something that might have been shame. I served on the council for 15 years. I watched Elder Kane consolidate power. I saw families lose influence, saw strong bloodlines produce weak children, and I told myself it was natural variation, random chance. I didn't ask questions because asking questions would have meant admitting we'd failed to protect our own. The silence that followed was absolute. We failed you, Vera said, looking directly at Lyra. All of you, and no apology will ever be enough. Lyra felt something crack in her chest, but she didn't know if it was grief or rage or something else entirely. Apologies don't matter, a voice called from the crowd. A woman pushed forward, older, gray-haired, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent their life outside. My daughter was one of the 17. She died 3 years ago. We were told her heart just gave out, that she was always fragile. But she wasn't fragile. She was murdered. Slowly. Over years. The woman's voice broke. Someone in the crowd started crying. So I don't care about apologies, the woman continued, wiping her eyes roughly. I want justice. I want every person who knew about this to pay. The crowd erupted in shouts, some supporting her, others protesting, chaos spreading like fire. Rowan let it build for a moment before raising his hand. Silence fell again, grudging but immediate. Justice will be served, Rowan said. But it requires your cooperation. We need access to all pack records. We need people willing to testify about what they saw, what they suspected. And we need to understand the full scope of the conspiracy before we can dismantle it. Why should we trust you? Someone shouted. You're an outsider. This is pack business. It stopped being pack business when Elder Kane committed treason against the crown, Rowan said flatly. He used pack resources to suppress potential alphas, which destabilized the territorial hierarchy. That makes it my business. And what about her? Another voice, this one full of venom. Lyra looked up to see Thomas, one of the senior hunters, pointing directly at her. She's the reason all this came out. She brought the king here, started this investigation. Our pack was fine before she decided to play victim. Your pack was rotting from the inside, Lyra said before she could stop herself. Every eye turned to her. You just didn't notice because you weren't the one suffering. Easy for you to say now that you're powerful, Thomas shot back. Now that you're standing next to a king, wearing fancy clothes, acting like you're better than us. I don't think I'm better than you, Lyra said, and she was surprised by how steady her voice was. I think I survived something you didn't even notice was happening. And if that makes you uncomfortable, that's your problem, not mine. Thomas's face went red. You self-righteous little... Enough, Rowan cut him off. If you have evidence that Lyra fabricated the poisoning, present it. Otherwise, keep your opinions to yourself." Thomas glared but fell silent. The assembly continued for another hour, with testimonies from the survivors, from family members of those who'd died, from pack members who'd suspected something was wrong but stayed quiet. By the end, the crowd's hostility had shifted, not gone, but redirected, less at Lyra, more at themselves. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was progress. As the crowd dispersed, Elder Vera approached the platform. "We need to talk," she said to Rowan. "Privately." They met in a small room off the pack hall, Rowan, Vera, Vex, and Lyra. The space felt too small, too warm, and Lyra's skin itched with the need to shift and run. "There's something I didn't say in front of the crowd," Vera began, her hands clasped tight enough that her knuckles were white. "Something I should have mentioned during the investigation, but I was afraid." "Of what?" Rowan asked. "Of what it means." Vera looked at Lyra. "Your grandmother didn't die naturally. Everyone knows that. But what they don't know is how she actually died." Lyra's throat went dry. "Elder Kane killed her. He admitted it." "He confessed to ordering her death," Vera corrected. "But he didn't do it himself. He couldn't. She was too strong. It took 3 alphas to bring her down, and even then, she almost won." "Who were they?" Rowan's voice was sharp. Vera's silence was answer enough. "They're still alive," Lyra said, realization hitting like ice water. "The wolves who killed my grandmother are still in this pack." "2 of them are," Vera confirmed. "The third died in a hunting accident 5 years ago, or what we were told was an accident." "Names," Rowan demanded. Vera hesitated, then said, "Thomas Kane, Elder Kane's younger brother, and Garrett Moss, head of the hunting division." The room went silent. "Thomas was at the assembly," Vex said quietly, "the one who called Lyra self-righteous." Lyra's hands clenched into fists. The hunter who'd insulted her, who'd tried to turn the crowd against her, he'd helped murder her grandmother. "Why didn't you report this?" Rowan's voice was dangerously calm. "Because I didn't know until after the fact," Vera said. "And by then, your grandmother was dead, and Elder Kane had consolidated power. Speaking up would have meant my own death. I was a coward." She looked at Lyra. "I'm sorry." Lyra didn't trust herself to speak. The rage building in her chest felt too big, too hot. Her wolf was clawing at her insides, demanding to be released, demanding blood. "Where's Garrett Moss now?" Rowan asked. "Leading the Eastern Border Patrol," Vera said. "He's been there for 3 days, won't be back until tomorrow." "And Thomas?" "At the barracks, probably. He usually—" The door burst open. One of Rowan's guards stood there, breathing hard. "Your Majesty, we have a problem." The problem was that someone had burned down the healer's house. By the time they reached the scene, the building was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the sky, smoke thick enough to choke on. Wolves had formed a bucket line from the nearby well, but it was too late. The structure was already collapsing. "Was anyone inside?" Rowan asked. "Miriam," Vex said grimly. "One of the healers who confessed. She was being held under house arrest pending trial." Lyra's stomach turned. "Was she—" "The guards say she was inside when the fire started," Vex confirmed. "They tried to get to her, but the flames were too intense. She's dead." "This wasn't an accident," Rowan said, studying the blaze. "Someone wanted her silenced." "Or they wanted to send a message," Vex countered. "This is the 3rd conspirator to die in 3 days. The council member who tried to run was found dead in his cell this morning, claimed he hanged himself, but the marks didn't match." Lyra's mind raced. Someone's cleaning house, getting rid of anyone who could testify. "Which means we're running out of witnesses," Rowan said, "and whoever's behind this is escalating." As if summoned by his words, an explosion rocked the ground. Lyra stumbled, ears ringing. Another explosion followed, then another. Buildings erupted in flames across the settlement. The granary, the armory, the pack hall itself. "We're under attack," Vex shouted, already moving. "Guards! Form defensive positions!" Chaos erupted. Wolves scattered in every direction, some shifting to fight, others fleeing with their families. Through the smoke and confusion, Lyra saw figures moving, organized, deliberate, wearing dark clothing that marked them as outsiders. Mercenaries. Someone had hired mercenaries to attack the pack during the investigation. "Get to safety!" Rowan ordered, already shifting. His black wolf form materialized in a blur of fur and fury, and he launched himself at the nearest attacker. Vex was shouting orders, trying to organize a defense, but the attack was too coordinated. The mercenaries knew exactly where to strike, taking out leadership, destroying resources, sowing maximum chaos. Lyra stood frozen in the middle of it all, her mind refusing to process what was happening. Then she saw Thomas. He was running toward the forest, not fighting, not helping. Running. Their eyes met across the burning square, and Lyra saw the truth in his expression. He'd done this. He'd hired the mercenaries. Thomas's face twisted into something ugly, and he shifted mid-stride, his brown wolf disappearing into the trees. Lyra didn't think. She just ran. Her shift happened mid-sprint, smoother than before, her white wolf form emerging with barely a pause. She hit the forest at full speed, following Thomas's scent through the underbrush. Behind her, the settlement burned. Ahead, a murderer fled, and Lyra ran faster than she'd ever run in her life. Geeked. Thomas was fast, but Lyra was faster. Her white wolf form moved through the forest like lightning, branches blurring past, the ground disappearing under her paws. She could hear Thomas ahead, crashing through bushes, breathing hard, fear scent thick in the air. She was gaining. They broke into a clearing, and Thomas spun to face her, his wolf form massive and scarred, all muscle and old violence. "You should have stayed dead," he snarled, his voice barely human. "Should have stayed weak like your pathetic grandmother." Lyra circled him, teeth bared. She'd never fought another wolf before, not really. All her training with Vex had been drills, controlled exercises. This was different. This was survival. Thomas lunged without warning, going for her throat. Lyra dodged, but barely. His teeth caught her shoulder, tearing fur and skin. Pain exploded through her, but she used the momentum to spin away, creating distance. "You're untrained," Thomas said, circling now. Blood dripped from his jaws. Her blood. "Playing at being powerful. But you're still just a weak little girl pretending to be a wolf." He attacked again, faster this time. Lyra met him head-on, and they collided in a tangle of teeth and claws. Thomas was bigger, stronger, more experienced. He got her pinned, jaws closing toward her neck. Lyra's wolf screamed inside her, not with fear, with rage. She twisted, impossibly fast, and her teeth found Thomas's foreleg. She bit down hard enough to shatter bone. Thomas howled and released her, stumbling back. Lyra was on him in an instant, using his imbalance to her advantage. She went for his throat, but he rolled away, favoring his broken leg. They separated, both bleeding, both panting. "Your grandmother begged," Thomas said, and his voice was full of venom. "At the end, she begged us to spare her family, to let her daughter live. We promised we would." Lyra went still. "We lied, of course," Thomas continued. "Killed her daughter 6 months later, made it look like a hunting accident. Your mother never even knew what she was." The world narrowed to a single point of rage. Lyra's grandmother had died begging for mercy. Her mother had been murdered. And this wolf, this monster, was proud of it. Something inside Lyra snapped. When she attacked again, it wasn't with technique or strategy. It was pure, overwhelming violence. She drove Thomas back, ignoring the pain when his teeth found her again, ignoring everything except the need to end this. Thomas tried to retreat, but his broken leg betrayed him. He stumbled. Lyra didn't hesitate. Her jaws closed around his throat, and she bit down with all the strength her white wolf form possessed. Thomas's eyes went wide. He tried to shift back to human, tried to speak, but Lyra didn't let go. Blood filled her mouth, hot and copper-tasting. Thomas stopped struggling. Lyra held on for another moment, making sure, then finally released him. The brown wolf collapsed, his body already beginning the shift back to human. Thomas lay there, eyes open and unseen, blood pooling beneath him. Dead. Lyra had killed him. She shifted back to human form and immediately vomited into the grass, her body shaking violently. The taste of blood wouldn't leave her mouth. Her hands were covered in it, her clothes soaked. She'd killed someone. The thought kept repeating, unable to find purchase in her mind. She'd taken a life, ended someone's existence, become a murderer herself. Lyra. She spun to find Rowan standing at the edge of the clearing, back in human form, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "He was running," Lyra said, and her voice sounded strange, distant. "He hired the mercenaries. He killed my grandmother, my mother. He... I know, Rowan said quietly. He moved closer, careful not to startle her. I heard everything. I killed him. In self-defense. He attacked you first. I could have stopped, could have just wounded him, brought him back for trial. Lyra looked down at her blood-stained hands. But I didn't want to stop. I wanted him dead. Rowan was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Welcome to power, Lyra. This is what it costs." The words hit harder than any physical blow. This was what power meant. Not just strength or status or being able to defend yourself. It meant making choices that left blood on your hands. It meant becoming the kind of person who could kill and live with it. It meant becoming exactly what Elder Kane had feared. "Come on," Rowan said, offering his hand. "We need to get back. The settlement needs help." Lyra took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Her legs felt unsteady, but she managed to walk. They made it 3 steps before arrows started falling from the trees. Rowan shoved Lyra behind him as mercenaries emerged from the forest, 8 of them, armed with weapons designed to kill wolves. More appeared behind them, cutting off their escape. They were surrounded. "Stay close," Rowan ordered, already shifting again. But before Lyra could follow, something hit her from behind, hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. She went down, vision swimming, and felt hands grabbing her, pulling her away from Rowan. She tried to shift, tried to fight, but something sharp pierced her neck. Poison. The world started spinning. Lyra saw Rowan fighting, a blur of black fur and violence, saw mercenaries falling, but there were too many. Then someone grabbed her hair, yanked her head back, and she was staring up at a face she recognized. Garrett Moss, the second wolf who'd killed her grandmother. "Hello, little wolf," he said, and smiled. "We have so much to discuss." Then everything went black. Lyra woke to the smell of damp stone and old blood. Her head pounded like someone had taken a hammer to it, and when she tried to move, chains rattled against rock. She was sitting upright, arms pulled above her head and locked to a wall she couldn't see in the darkness. Her shoulders screamed in protest, and her mouth tasted like copper and ash. She tried to shift, but nothing happened. The poison was still in her system, suppressing her wolf. Finally awake, a torch flared to life across the room, and Lyra's eyes adjusted slowly. She was in some kind of cave, natural rock formations jutting from the ceiling, water dripping somewhere in the distance. And standing in front of her, holding the torch, was Garrett Moss. He looked older than she remembered from the assembly. Gray streaked his beard, and deep lines carved his face, but his eyes were sharp and cold. "Where's Rowan?" Lyra's voice came out hoarse. "Alive," Garrett said. "For now, my men are keeping him busy while we have this conversation." "What conversation? You're going to kill me anyway." "Maybe." Garrett set the torch in a wall bracket and pulled up a wooden crate to sit on. "Or maybe we can make a deal." Lyra laughed, and it hurt her ribs. "You murdered my grandmother and my mother. What deal could we possibly make?" "The same deal we offered your grandmother before she got stupid." Garrett leaned forward. Power. Real power. Not the scraps the pack throws you, but actual control over territories, over bloodlines, over the future of wolfkind. By poisoning anyone who threatens you? By maintaining order. Garrett's voice hardened. Your grandmother didn't understand that. She thought power was about strength, about dominance. But real power is about control, about making sure the strong don't tear everything apart fighting each other. You're insane. I'm practical. Garrett stood, started pacing. White wolves are too dangerous to exist unchecked. They destabilize everything, challenge every alpha, upset every hierarchy. Your grandmother could have ruled the entire North if she'd wanted. Do you know what that would have meant? Wars, bloodshed, packs destroying each other for dominance. So you killed her to prevent wars? Lyra's voice dripped with contempt. How noble. We killed her to save thousands of lives. Garrett stopped pacing, turned to face her. And we'll do it again if we have to, unless you're smarter than she was. Lyra's mind raced through the fog of pain and poison. Garrett was stalling, which meant he needed something from her, information maybe, or compliance. Either way, he wouldn't have bothered with this conversation if he just planned to kill her immediately. What's the deal? She asked. Garrett's expression shifted into something that might have been relief. You renounce your claim to White Wolf status. Publicly. You tell everyone the transformation at the ceremony was a fluke, a stress reaction, something temporary. Then you disappear, go somewhere far from pack politics, live a quiet life. We'll even provide resources. Make sure you're comfortable. And if I refuse, then we dose you with enough suppression poison to keep you weak for the rest of your very short life." Garrett pulled a vial from his pocket, dark liquid that looked like oil. "This is concentrated. What Miriam gave you over 23 years, I can do in 23 seconds. You'll never shift again, never feel your wolf again. You'll die human and forgotten." The threat landed like a physical blow. Lyra had spent her entire life weak, believing it was natural. Now that she knew what strength felt like, the thought of losing it again was worse than death. But Garrett had made a mistake. He'd told her too much, revealed too many details about the conspiracy, about their methods, about what they were afraid of. He'd told her because he thought she was already beaten. "How many?" Lyra asked. Garrett frowned. "What? How many packs are involved in this? It's not just mine, is it? You said you were maintaining order across territories. That means this conspiracy is bigger than Elder Kane, bigger than my grandmother." Garrett's silence was confirmation enough. "It's everywhere," Lyra said, pieces falling into place. "Every major pack has someone like you. Someone suppressing white wolf bloodlines, keeping the strong weak, maintaining control. We prefer to call it stability. You prefer to call it whatever lets you sleep at night." Lyra tested the chains again, still locked tight. "How long have you been doing this?" 70 years, Garrett said, and there was something like pride in his voice. "Since the last white wolf uprising nearly tore the territories apart, we swore it would never happen again." "And Rowan? Does he know?" Garrett's expression darkened. "The king is a complication. He's young, idealistic, thinks he can change centuries of tradition with investigations and trials. He doesn't understand what's at stake. He understands you're murderers. He understands nothing." Garrett moved closer, and Lyra could smell alcohol on his breath. He'd been drinking, which meant he was nervous. "Good. But you could help him understand. You could tell him this is bigger than one pack's corruption, that exposing us would destabilize every territory, that some secrets need to stay buried. Or I could tell him the truth and watch you all burn." Garrett's hand shot out, grabbed her throat. "You stupid girl. You think you're the hero in this story? You're a disease, a threat to everything we've built, and if you won't take the deal—" The cave entrance exploded inward. Rowan's black wolf form crashed through the opening with the force of an avalanche, mercenaries flying in every direction. He was covered in blood, not all of it his, and his eyes blazed with something beyond rage. Garrett released Lyra and shifted instantly, his gray wolf lunging to meet Rowan's charge. They collided midair in a clash of fangs and fury. Lyra yanked at her chains desperately, but they held. She could only watch as the two wolves tore at each other, neither giving ground, both fighting with the kind of violence that promised only one of them was leaving this cave alive. Rowan was bigger, stronger, but Garrett fought dirty, going for eyes, for tendons, for anything that would give him an advantage. Blood splattered across stone. The cave echoed with snarls and the sound of breaking bone. Then Garrett made a mistake. He lunged for Rowan's throat and overextended, leaving his flank exposed. Rowan's jaws closed around Garrett's spine, thawed, and bit down hard. The gray wolf's howl cut off mid-sound. He collapsed, back legs useless, and shifted back to human form involuntarily, a sign of catastrophic injury. Garrett lay there gasping, unable to move anything below his waist. Rowan shifted back to human, breathing hard, covered in wounds. He looked at Lyra first. "Are you hurt?" "Chained," Lyra managed. "Poisoned, but alive." Rowan moved to the wall, examined the locks on her chains. "These need a key." "He has it," Lyra said, nodding toward Garrett. Rowan walked over to the broken man, searched his pockets, and found a ring of keys. He returned to Lyra and unlocked the chains with hands that were surprisingly steady, considering he'd just fought off a dozen mercenaries. The moment Lyra's arms were free, she collapsed. Rowan caught her, lowered her gently to the ground. "The poison?" he asked. "Suppression compound, same as before. I just need time." "Time we don't have." Rowan looked back at Garrett. "How many mercenaries did you bring?" Garrett laughed, and it came out wet and painful. "Enough. This cave has 2 entrances. My men are coming through the other one right now. You're trapped." As if summoned by his words, footsteps echoed from deeper in the cave system. Multiple sets, moving fast. "Can you walk?" Rowan asked Lyra. She tried to stand, made it halfway before her legs gave out. No. Then I'm carrying you. Rowan hauled her up, slinging her over his shoulder in a movement that probably would have been more dignified if Lyra hadn't been dead weight. Wait, Lyra said. Garrett, we can't leave him. He knows things about the conspiracy, about other packs. He's paralyzed and bleeding out, Rowan said. He's not going anywhere. Please. Garrett's voice was weaker now. Don't leave me for them. They'll kill me for failing. You murdered a white wolf and her daughter, Rowan said coldly. You spent 70 years destroying lives to maintain power. Whatever your men do to you is justice. He turned toward the cave entrance, Lyra still over his shoulder. She needs to know, Garrett shouted desperately. The conspiracy? It goes all the way to the Council of Alphas. They're the ones who ordered your grandmother's death. They're the ones who've been coordinating the suppression for decades. If you expose me, they'll come for you next. Both of you. Rowan stopped. The Council, Lyra said quietly. The ruling body that governed all wolf territories, made up of the most powerful alphas from each region. They're all involved? Not all, Garrett gasped, but enough. The ones who matter. They'll never let a white wolf threaten their power. Never. The footsteps were getting closer. Rowan made a decision. Vex! He shouted toward the cave entrance. Commander Vex appeared moments later, her armor dented and blood-stained, but her expression sharp. Your Majesty? Secure this man, Rowan ordered. He's our witness. Don't let him die. Vex looked at Garrett with open disgust, but nodded. Yes, sir. Then Rowan was moving again, carrying Lyra out of the cave and into the forest beyond. Behind them, she could hear fighting, Vex's soldiers engaging the mercenaries coming from the other entrance. The settlement came into view through the trees, and Lyra's breath caught. It was burning. Not completely. The fires had been mostly contained, but enough damage had been done. The granary was gone. The armory was a smoking ruin. Bodies lay scattered in the square, both wolves and mercenaries. But the pack was fighting back. Lyra could see them organizing, forming defensive lines, protecting their families. They were battered, but not broken. Rowan carried her to the pack hall, which had somehow survived mostly intact, and set her down on a bench inside. How long until the poison wears off? He asked. Hours, Lyra said. Maybe a day. I don't know. This dose was stronger. Rowan's jaw tightened. Then he turned to one of his guards. Find me a healer. A real one. Not anyone connected to Elder Kane's network. The guard ran off. Lyra grabbed Rowan's arm before he could follow. What Garrett said about the council. Do you believe him? Rowan was quiet for a moment. It would explain things. Why suppression has been so widespread, why no one questioned it. If the council was coordinating, they could have kept it hidden for generations. Then what do? We expose them. Rowan's voice was hard. All of them. But first we survive today. The fighting outside was dying down. Vex appeared in the doorway, covered in even more blood than before. Mercenaries are routed, she reported. Lost 8 soldiers, but we captured 6 of theirs alive. The rest fled into the forest. And Garrett? Secured. My medic says he'll live, though he'll never walk again. Vex's expression was grim. He's already asking to make a deal. Of course he is. Rowan turned to Lyra. Can you identify the other survivors? The ones who were suppressed like you? Lyra nodded, even though her head still pounded. Good. We're going to need them. Over the next few hours, as the poison slowly worked its way out of Lyra's system, a plan took shape. The 17 survivors were gathered, those who could still travel at least. Some were too weak, too damaged by years of suppression. But 9 of them stood in the pack hall, looking at each other with expressions that ranged from hope to terror. Lyra recognized them all now. The stable worker was named David. The former scout was Elena. There was a young man barely out of his teens named Marcus, not the same Marcus who'd rejected Lyra, but the irony still stung. A mother with 2 children. An elderly wolf who'd spent 40 years believing he was naturally weak. All of them had been stolen from. All of them deserved justice. We're going to the council, Rowan announced to the assembled group. In 3 days, they meet to discuss territorial disputes. We're going to present evidence of the conspiracy and demand accountability. They'll never admit to it, Elder Vera said. She'd been helping organize the recovery effort, and she looked exhausted. The council protects its own. They will if we give them no choice, Rowan gestured to the survivors. These wolves are living proof of the suppression. Combined with Garrett's testimony and the records we've seized, we have an undeniable case. Garrett's testimony is worthless, Vex said. He's a proven liar and murderer. The council will discredit him immediately. Which is why he's not our primary witness. Rowan looked at Lyra. She is. Every eye in the room turned to her. Lyra's stomach dropped. What? You're a white wolf, Rowan said. The council has spent 70 years trying to prevent your existence. When you stand in front of them and demand justice, they can't ignore you. They can't suppress you. Not anymore. They can kill me, Lyra pointed out. Not in front of representatives from every pack in the territories, Rowan countered. The council meeting is public. Hundreds of witnesses. If they move against you openly, they prove everything we're accusing them of. And if they move against me quietly? After the meeting? Rowan's expression was grim. Then we make sure you're never alone. It wasn't reassuring, but it was honest. David, the stable worker, stepped forward. I'll testify too, if it helps. Me too, Elena said. One by one, the other survivors agreed. They were terrified. Lyra could smell it on them. But they were willing to stand up anyway, because they'd already lost everything else. 3 days, Rowan said. We use that time to prepare, to gather every piece of evidence, to make our case unbreakable. And then we go to war, not with teeth and claws, with truth, Sam. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Lyra spent hours with Vex, learning to control her transformations despite the lingering effects of the poison. The older woman was merciless, pushing Lyra past exhaustion and into something harder. You're going to stand in front of the most powerful alphas alive, Vex said during one particularly brutal training session. If you show weakness, they'll tear you apart. So we eliminate the weakness. By the 3rd day, Lyra could shift smoothly, hold her wolf form for hours, and return to human without collapsing. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Rowan spent the same time building their case. He interviewed every survivor personally, documented every instance of suppression, created a timeline that stretched back 70 years. The evidence was overwhelming, but evidence didn't matter if no one was willing to hear it. On the morning they were scheduled to leave for the council meeting, Marcus appeared at the pack hall. Not Marcus the survivor. Marcus Kane, the one who'd rejected Lyra at the ceremony. He looked terrible, thinner than Lyra remembered, with dark circles under his eyes and a haunted expression. I need to talk to you, he said when he found her in the hall. Lyra almost refused, but something in his voice stopped her. They walked outside, away from listening ears. The settlement was still recovering, rebuilding the granary, repairing damaged homes. Smoke still drifted from the ruins of the armory. I'm leaving, Marcus said abruptly. The pack, the territory, everything. Lyra blinked. What? I can't stay here. Marcus looked at the destruction around them. My father destroyed everything, and I helped him, even if I didn't know it. Every time I told myself I was following good advice, every time I chose ambition over integrity, I was helping him maintain the system that hurt you. You didn't know about the poisoning. I knew something was wrong, Marcus said. I knew the pack leadership was corrupt. I just didn't care enough to do anything about it. And that makes me complicit. Lyra didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to argue, to tell him he was being too hard on himself, but a larger part agreed with him completely. Where will you go? She asked finally. South, maybe. Away from pack politics. Away from everything. Marcus met her eyes. I wanted to apologize. Really apologize. Not the half-hearted attempt I made before. You deserved better than how I treated you. You deserved someone who chose you without hesitation. Yeah, Lyra said, I did. Marcus flinched, but nodded. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're going to the council. I'm glad you're fighting back, and I hope you win. He turned to leave, then stopped. Serafina left too, he said. 2 days ago. She said she couldn't be part of a pack that had done what ours did. I think she was right. Marcus walked away and Lyra watched him go. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no grief, no anger, just a distant acknowledgement that this chapter of her life was finally closed. She had bigger battles to fight. They traveled to the council meeting with a convoy of 50 wolves, Rowan's personal guard, the survivors, and representatives from Lyra's pack who wanted to see justice done. The journey took 2 days, cutting through territories Lyra had never seen before. The council met in a massive amphitheater carved into the side of a mountain. It was ancient, built by wolves centuries ago, designed to hold thousands. As their convoy approached, Lyra could see other groups arriving from different directions. Representatives from every major pack in the Northern Territories, all gathering for the quarterly meeting. Hundreds of wolves, hundreds of witnesses, or hundreds of enemies. "Stay close to me," Rowan said as they entered the amphitheater. "The council will try to control the narrative. Don't let them." The interior was breathtaking, tiered stone seating rising in circles around a central floor open to the sky above. Lyra had never felt so small, so exposed. The council sat at the highest tier, 7 alphas representing the 7 major territories. Lyra recognized some from descriptions she'd heard. Alpha Cairn of the mountain packs, massive and scarred. Alpha Riva of the coastal territories, beautiful and cold. Alpha Thorn of the eastern forests, old and calculating. All of them stared down at Rowan's group with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. Alpha Cairn stood, and the amphitheater fell silent. "King Rowan," he said, his voice carrying across the space, "you've requested an emergency session. State your business." Rowan stepped forward, pulling Lyra with him. "I'm here to expose a conspiracy," Rowan said clearly. "A coordinated effort spanning 70 years, multiple territories, and reaching the highest levels of wolf leadership. A conspiracy to suppress white wolf bloodlines through systematic poisoning, murder, and manipulation." The amphitheater erupted in shouts and denials. "That's absurd! He's lost his mind! This is an insult to the council." Alpha Cairn raised his hand and silence fell again. "Those are serious accusations, Your Majesty. I assume you have evidence?" "We have 17 survivors who were poisoned," Rowan said. "We have testimony from one of the conspirators. We have decades of records. And we have a white wolf who stands as living proof that the suppression was not only real, but actively maintained by pack leadership." He gestured to Lyra. Every eye in the amphitheater turned to her. Lyra's hands trembled, but she forced herself to step forward, to stand beside Rowan without flinching. "Shift," Alpha Cairn commanded. "Prove your claim." Lyra took a deep breath and reached for her wolf. The transformation was smooth, powerful, and when she stood in the center of the amphitheater in her white wolf form, the silence was absolute. She let them see her, let them understand what they'd tried to destroy. Then she shifted back to human, standing naked and defiant in front of hundreds of wolves. Someone handed her a cloak, and she wrapped it around herself without taking her eyes off the council. "My name is Lyra Vance," she said, and her voice didn't shake. "I am the granddaughter of Elena Vance, the white wolf you murdered 70 years ago. I am the daughter of Sarah Vance, who you killed to cover your crimes, and I am here to make sure everyone knows what you've done." The amphitheater exploded into chaos. But this time, Lyra didn't run. She stood her ground and let the truth burn everything down. The chaos that followed Lyra's declaration didn't die down. It built like a storm. Wolves were shouting from every tier of the amphitheater, some demanding proof, others calling for Rowan's arrest, a few actually defending Lyra's claim. The noise crashed against the stone walls and echoed back even louder. Alpha Cairn stood at the highest tier, his massive frame radiating authority, but even he couldn't restore order immediately. He let the chaos run for a full minute before slamming his hand against the stone podium hard enough to crack it. The sound cut through everything. Silence fell, jagged and unstable. "You accuse the council of conspiracy," Cairn said, his eyes locked on Lyra. "Of murder. Of crimes spanning 70 years. These are not small claims, girl. They require extraordinary evidence." "We have it," Rowan said before Lyra could respond. He gestured to Vex, who stepped forward carrying a leather case. From it, she pulled stacks of documents, healers' records, correspondence between pack leaders, financial transactions that trace back decades. She laid them on a table that had been hastily set up in the center of the amphitheater floor. "These are suppression records from 17 different packs," Rowan said, "all following the same protocols, all targeting the same bloodlines. The consistency alone proves coordination." Alpha Riva stood from her seat, her movements liquid and precise. Documents can be forged, especially when someone wants to discredit legitimate leadership. Then explain the survivors, Rowan shot back. He gestured to the group standing behind him. David, Elena, young Marcus, and the others. All of them were poisoned. All of them come from families that once produced powerful alphas. All of them were told their weakness was natural. Coincidence, Alpha Thorn said, his ancient voice carrying surprising strength. Genetic variation. Some bloodlines weaken over generations. It's natural selection. Natural selection doesn't follow the same recipe across 17 territories, Vex said sharply. She held up a particular document. This is the suppression formula used in the eastern forests. And this, she held up another, is from the coastal packs. Identical compounds, identical dosages, identical timing. Unless natural selection learned to write prescriptions, someone was coordinating this. Murmurs spread through the crowd. The evidence was damning, and people were starting to see it. But Alpha Cairn wasn't done. Even if we accept that some pack leaders acted improperly, he said carefully, that doesn't implicate the council. Local corruption is not our responsibility. Garrett Moss says otherwise, Lyra said, and her voice cut through the amphitheater like a blade. Every eye turned back to her. Garrett confessed before witnesses, Lyra continued. He told us the council ordered my grandmother's execution. That you've been coordinating White Wolf suppression for 70 years because you feared losing power. The testimony of a condemned criminal, Alpha Riva said dismissively. Worthless. Is it? Rowan moved to stand beside Lyra. Because we also have financial records showing payments from council accounts to various pack healers. Large payments, made quarterly, dating back decades. What were those payments for, Alpha Cairn? Cairn's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Council funds support medical research across territories. That's common knowledge. Medical research into suppression compounds? Rowan pressed. Because that's what the healers were developing. We have their testimony. Coerced testimony, Alpha Thorn interjected. From healers facing criminal charges. They'll say anything to reduce their sentences. The other council members were nodding, closing ranks. Lyra could see the strategy forming, deny everything, discredit the witnesses, claim the evidence was manufactured. If they held together, they might actually survive this, which meant Lyra needed to break them apart. My grandmother didn't just threaten your power, Lyra said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She threatened your secrets. The amphitheater went quiet. Cairn's eyes narrowed. Explain. You killed her before she could expose how many of you bought your positions through murder, Lyra said. She was guessing now, extrapolating from fragments Garrett had let slip, but the way several council members went rigid told her she was close to something. How many of you on that council actually inherited your territories legitimately? How many killed your predecessors and made it look natural? That's a baseless accusation, Alpha Riva snapped, but her voice had an edge it hadn't had before. Then prove it, Lyra challenged. Open investigations into how each of you came to power. Let neutral parties examine the deaths of your predecessors. If you have nothing to hide, it should be simple. The council members exchanged glances, and Lyra knew she'd hit something vital. This is absurd, Alpha Cairn said, but he didn't sound as confident. We're not on trial here. Maybe you should be, someone called from the crowd. Lyra looked up to see an older wolf standing in the lower tiers, gray-haired, wearing the formal robes of a pack historian. I'm Recorder Finn from the Mountain Territories. I've documented pack successions for 40 years, and I've always wondered about the pattern. Cairn's face darkened. Finn, 7 alphas have died under questionable circumstances in the past 50 years, Finn continued, his voice growing stronger. All of them replaced by wolves who immediately aligned with council policies. All of them ruled natural causes or accidents, but the pattern is there if you look for it. Other voices joined in now. My uncle was one of them, a woman shouted. Died in a hunting accident the week before he was going to challenge council authority on border disputes. My sister's mate disappeared after questioning suppression protocols in our territory, another wolf added. Never found the body. The amphitheater was fracturing. The crowd that had been hostile to Lyra minutes ago was turning on the council, and the council was losing control of the narrative. Alpha Cairn slammed his hand down again. Enough. This meeting is descending into conspiracy theory and mob justice. We will not... You will answer for your crimes, Rowan interrupted, and his voice carried absolute authority. Or I will use my power as king to dissolve the council entirely and establish new leadership. That brought everything to a halt. The council stared at Rowan like he'd suggested burning down the amphitheater. You can't do that, Alpha Thorn said slowly. The council predates the monarchy. You have no authority. I have every authority, Rowan countered. The council exists to serve the territories, not to rule them. If you've become corrupt, if you've been coordinating crimes against your own people, then you've violated the compact that gives you legitimacy, which means I can remove you and let the Pax choose new representation. It was a threat with teeth, and everyone knew it. If Rowan actually dissolved the council, the resulting power vacuum would be catastrophic. But the threat alone was enough to force their hand. Alpha Riva stood, her composure cracking for the first time. You'd throw the territories into chaos over the word of one girl? I'd throw the territories into chaos to stop you from murdering innocent wolves, Rowan said. Yes. The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Then Alpha Cairn did something Lyra never expected. He laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound, bitter and harsh and resigned. But it was genuine. You really are your father's son, Cairn said to Rowan, idealistic to the point of stupidity. He looked around the amphitheater, at the hundreds of wolves watching this confrontation. Fine. You want the truth? Here it is. The other council members started to protest, but Cairn waved them off. The girl is right, he said flatly. We coordinated the suppression. We ordered the execution of Elena Vance and anyone else whose bloodline posed a threat to stability. We did it because 70 years ago the territories were on the brink of civil war. White wolves were emerging everywhere, and they were tearing packs apart fighting for dominance. Thousands died. Entire bloodlines were wiped out. The territories were destroying themselves. The amphitheater was dead silent now. So yes, Cairn continued, we made a decision. We decided that preventing white wolf manifestations was worth the cost, that maintaining order justified the suppression, that a few hundred wolves living diminished lives was better than thousands dying in wars. You don't get to make that choice, Lyra said, and her voice shook with rage. You don't get to decide who's too dangerous to exist. Someone has to, Cairn shot back. Do you know what you are, girl? You're a weapon, a living, breathing threat to every power structure in the territories. If we let white wolves exist unchecked, we go back to the wars, back to the bloodshed. Is that what you want? I want people to have the choice to be who they are, Lyra said. I want wolves to live without being poisoned by the people who are supposed to protect them. I want a world where strength isn't feared, it's celebrated. That world doesn't exist, Cairn said. It never has. Then we'll build it, Rowan said quietly. Starting today. He turned to address the entire amphitheater. The council has confessed to conspiracy, to murder, to decades of crimes against the territories they were sworn to serve. Under the authority granted to me as king, I hereby dissolve the Council of Alphas effective immediately. New representatives will be chosen by each territory through fair elections within 60 days. Until then, territorial governance will be overseen by a coalition of neutral parties selected by popular vote. The amphitheater erupted again, but this time it wasn't chaos. It was energy. Hope. The sound of something old and corrupt being torn down and something new being built in its place. The council members were shouting protests, but their voices were drowned out. It was over. They'd lost. Lyra felt her legs go weak, and Rowan caught her arm. Breathe, he said quietly. You did it. But Lyra wasn't sure what she'd done. Won? Survived? Changed everything? All of the above, maybe. The aftermath took weeks to unfold. The former council members were placed under house arrest pending trials. Some territories immediately held elections for new representatives. Others descended into brief power struggles before stabilizing. The transition wasn't smooth, revolutions never were, but it was happening. And at the center of it all, whether she wanted to be or not, was Lyra. She'd become a symbol. The white wolf who'd stood against the council and won. People started calling her the breaker, the one who broke the conspiracy, broke the old order, broke 70 years of silence. Lyra hated the title. It felt too grand, too heroic, when all she'd done was refuse to stay quiet about being poisoned. But symbols didn't care what you wanted them to be. The survivors, All 17 of them, who'd been suppressed, were receiving treatment. Real healers, not the ones who'd poisoned them, working to reverse the damage. Some were recovering faster than others. David had shifted for the first time in his life 2 weeks after the council meeting, emerging as a powerful gray wolf that shocked everyone who'd known him as weak. Elena was still struggling, her body too damaged by decades of poison, but she was trying. They were all trying. Lyra's own pack, her former pack, she had to keep reminding herself, was rebuilding. Elder Vera had been elected as the new permanent leader, and she was implementing reforms at a pace that made some wolves nervous and others hopeful. The damaged buildings were being repaired. The families of those who died in the mercenary attack were being compensated. It was slow, painful progress. Marcus Kane had indeed left for the south. Lyra heard about it third hand and felt nothing. Serafina had sent her a letter, a short, formal thing, apologizing for not seeing what was happening in the pack, for not questioning the power structures she'd benefited from. Lyra hadn't responded. She didn't know what to say. Apologies didn't undo the past. And Rowan had asked her to stay at the capital. As what? Lyra had asked when he'd made the offer. Your pet white wolf? Your proof that the system is changing? As someone who understands what we're fighting, Rowan had said, the old council is gone, but the mentality that created them is still out there. We need people who won't accept corruption, who won't stay quiet when they see injustice. You need revolutionaries. I need wolves who give a damn. Lyra had agreed, mostly because she didn't know what else to do. Going back to her pack felt impossible. They were rebuilding, but the memories were too sharp there. Every street reminded her of being weak, being dismissed, being nothing. Here, at the capital, she was something else. She just wasn't sure what yet. 2 months after the council meeting, Lyra stood in the royal training grounds, facing off against Commander Vex. They'd been sparring for an hour, and Lyra was covered in sweat and bruises. But she'd also landed 3 solid hits, which was more than she'd managed in any previous session. Better, Vex said, circling. You're finally learning to use your size as an advantage. Lyra's white wolf form was massive, larger than most alphas, built for power rather than speed. She'd spent weeks trying to fight like a smaller wolf before Vex had beaten the stupidity out of her. Use what you are, Vex had said repeatedly. Stop trying to be something else. It was good advice for fighting. It was also good advice for everything else. They went another round, and this time when Vex lunged, Lyra was ready. She caught the older wolf's charge, used the momentum to throw her into a roll, and pinned her before she could recover. Vex shifted back to human, grinning despite being pinned. Excellent. Now, let me up before I make you regret it. Lyra released her and shifted back as well, breathing hard. You're ready, Vex said. For what? Whatever comes next. Vex stood, brushed dirt off her training gear. The new council representatives are being sworn in next week. There's going to be resistance from the old guard. Probably violence. You need to be ready to stand your ground. I thought we already won. We won a battle, Vex corrected. The war is going to take years, maybe decades. Power doesn't give up easily. Lyra knew she was right. Already there had been incidents, attacks on the survivors, threats against pack leaders who supported the reforms, attempts to undermine the new elections. The old system was dying, but it wasn't dead yet. Can I ask you something? Lyra said as they walked toward the water barrels. Depends on the question. Why did you help me? When Rowan first brought me here, you could have refused, could have told him I was a waste of time, but you didn't. Vex was quiet for a moment, drinking deeply from a water dipper. I had a sister, she said finally. Younger than me, strong, smart, should have been an incredible wolf. But she got sick when she was 12. The healers said it was a blood disorder, something genetic. They gave her medicine for years, but she just got weaker. She died when she was 19. Lyra felt something cold settle in her stomach. She was suppressed. I didn't know it then, Vex said. Didn't realize until after the council meeting, when I saw the suppression protocols. The symptoms matched. The timeline matched. My sister was murdered, and I spent 20 years believing it was natural. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be angry. Be determined. Be the wolf she never got to be. Vex looked at Lyra directly. That's why I help you, because every time you get stronger, every time you refuse to back down, you prove they were wrong. About you, about her, about all of it. Lyra nodded, not trusting her voice. They finished their water in silence, then headed back toward the palace. Rowan was waiting in the courtyard, talking with a messenger. When he saw Lyra, he dismissed the messenger and walked over. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where 3 territories are refusing to hold elections. They're claiming the council dissolution was illegal and they won't recognize new leadership." Lyra's jaw tightened. "Let me guess. Territories that benefited most from the old system." "Exactly." Rowan looked tired. He'd been working non-stop since the council meeting, trying to hold the territories together through the transition. "I need to make an example. Show that defiance has consequences." "You're going to war?" "I'm going to threaten it very convincingly." Rowan paused. "And I need you to come with me." Lyra blinked. "Why?" "Because you're a white wolf. Because people are scared of you. Because when you stand beside me and demand compliance, it carries weight." Rowan's expression was serious. "I know you didn't ask to be a symbol, but you are one. And right now we need symbols more than we need soldiers." Lyra wanted to refuse, wanted to say she was done being stared at, judged, feared. But Vex's words were still echoing in her head. Be the wolf she never got to be. "When do we leave?" Lyra asked. They traveled to the first defiant territory, the eastern forests, where Alpha Thorn had ruled before his arrest, with a contingent of 200 soldiers. It was meant to look like a diplomatic mission, but everyone knew it was a show of force. The local leadership met them at the border, a group of older wolves who looked like they'd been carved from the same bitter wood. "King Rowan," their spokesman said, a grizzled wolf named Cade. "You're not welcome here." "I'm king," Rowan said flatly. "I'm welcome everywhere. Now step aside." Cade didn't move. "The council dissolution was illegal. We don't recognize your authority to—" "The council confessed to 70 years of conspiracy," Rowan interrupted. "They lost the right to authority the moment they admitted to murder. Now you can either hold elections and choose new representation, or I can occupy your territory and install leadership myself. Your choice." The wolves behind Cade shifted uneasily. This was the moment, where they either backed down or committed to resistance. Cade looked at Lyra, and his expression twisted with something between fear and contempt. "You bring a white wolf to threaten us," he said, "a girl who was nothing a few months ago. You really think that scares us?" Lyra stepped forward before Rowan could respond. "I don't need to scare you," she said quietly. "I just need to remind you what happens when power corrupts. When people like you decide who's too dangerous to exist. My grandmother was murdered because she threatened the status quo. My mother was killed to cover it up. 17 wolves in my pack alone were poisoned to maintain control. How many in yours?" Cade's expression flickered. "How many wolves in your territory are weaker than they should be?" Lyra pressed. "How many families lost children to mysterious illnesses? How many promising young wolves never reached their potential because someone decided they were a threat?" The wolves behind Cade were murmuring now, looking at each other with dawning horror. "You can resist change," Lyra continued. "You can refuse elections and dig in with the old system. But eventually, your people are going to ask why. Why you're protecting the same structure that poisoned their families. Why you're more loyal to a corrupt council than to the wolves you're supposed to serve. And when they ask, what are you going to tell them?" Cade stared at her, and Lyra could see the fight draining out of him. "We'll hold elections," he said finally, his voice heavy. "But not because you threatened us. Because you're right." It wasn't a complete victory, resentment was still thick in the air, but it was progress. They repeated the process in the other 2 defiant territories, and each time Lyra's presence tipped the balance. Not through threats or violence, but through truth. Through standing as living proof that the old system was built on lies. By the time they returned to the capital 3 weeks later, all territories had committed to holding elections. The transition was happening. The swearing-in ceremony for the new council representatives took place in the same amphitheater where the old council had been dissolved. Lyra stood off to the side with Vex and the other survivors, watching as 7 new alphas took their oaths. Some were young, some were old. Some had been powerful before. Others were rising from obscurity. But all of them had been chosen by their territories rather than inheriting power through murder and manipulation. It wasn't a perfect system. Nothing was. But it was better. When the ceremony ended, Rowan found Lyra in the crowd. "The new council wants to meet you," he said. Why? Because you're the reason they exist. Rowan's expression was unreadable. They want to offer you a position. Lyra's stomach dropped. What kind of position? Representative for displaced and suppressed wolves. A new role they're creating. You'd have a voice in council decisions, advocate for reforms, make sure what happened to you never happens again. It was everything Lyra had fought for. A chance to actually change things, to protect others, to turn her suffering into something meaningful. It also sounded exhausting. I need to think about it, she said. Rowan nodded. Take your time, they'll wait. But Lyra knew she wouldn't take long to decide. She'd already spent too many years being invisible, being powerless, being nothing. She wasn't going back to that. That night, Lyra climbed to the highest tower of the palace and looked out over the capital. The city spread below her, lights flickering in windows, wolves moving through streets, life continuing in all its messy complexity. Somewhere out there, other white wolves might be emerging from suppression, discovering their strength, realizing they'd been lied to their entire lives. They would need guidance, support, someone who understood what they were going through. Lyra could be that person. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Rowan climbing the last few stairs. Figured you'd be up here, he said, moving to stand beside her at the railing. Needed to think. And I'm going to accept the council position. Lyra looked at him. But I have conditions. Rowan raised an eyebrow. Such as? Full authority to investigate any territory for suppression. No restrictions, no oversight. If I think wolves are being poisoned, I can go in and find out. That's going to make you extremely unpopular with some pack leaders. I'm already unpopular. Lyra's voice was firm. At least this way, I'm unpopular for the right reasons. Rowan was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Done. What else? Protection for the survivors. All of them. I want resources allocated to their recovery. Medical care, training, housing if they need it. They suffered for decades. They deserve support. Agreed. And one more thing. Lyra took a breath. I want my pack's territory renamed. No more calling it the Kane territory. It's been too long associated with corruption and murder. The wolves there deserve a fresh start. What should it be called? Lyra thought about her grandmother, who'd died fighting. About her mother, who'd never known what she could have been. About all the wolves who'd been stolen from before they even knew strength was possible. Vance territory, she said. After the bloodline they tried to destroy. Rowan smiled, a real smile, rare and genuine. I think that's perfect. They stood in silence for a while, watching the city below. You know, this is just the beginning, Rowan said eventually. There will be resistance, wolves who want the old system back, threats against you, against the reforms. It's going to be dangerous. Everything worth doing is dangerous, Lyra said. I learned that the hard way. You could still walk away, take a quiet life somewhere far from politics. No one would blame you. Lyra thought about Marcus, who'd done exactly that. Run away from the corruption and the guilt and the responsibility. She didn't blame him for it. Sometimes running was the right choice, but not for her. I spent 23 years being quiet, Lyra said, being invisible, accepting what people told me I was instead of discovering it for myself. I'm done with that. If I'm going to be a symbol, if I'm going to be feared and hated and stared at everywhere I go, then at least it'll be for something that matters. Rowan looked at her with something that might have been respect or pride or just understanding. For what it's worth, he said, I think you're going to be extraordinary at this. I think I'm going to be terrible at it, Lyra admitted. But I'm going to try anyway. That was all any of them could do. Try, fight, refuse to stay silent when they saw injustice, build something better from the ashes of something broken. 3 months later, Lyra stood in front of a crowd of 200 wolves in Vance territory. The name had been officially changed, and watched as they gathered for their first free election in 70 years. Elder Vera was running unopposed, which wasn't surprising. She'd earned the pack's trust through months of hard work and genuine reform, but the fact that there was an election at all, that wolves had a choice in their leadership, felt revolutionary. David stood beside Lyra, now serving as her assistant in the council investigations. His gray wolf was strong and steady, and he'd thrown himself into the work with the determination of someone making up for lost time. Nervous? He asked. Terrified, Lyra admitted. Good. Means you're taking it seriously. The election proceeded without incident. Vera won, as expected, and gave a speech about accountability and transparency that made several older pack members uncomfortable. Progress was like that, uncomfortable for those who'd benefited from the old system. After the ceremony, wolves approached Lyra one by one, some to thank her, some to ask for help investigating their own territories. A few just to see the white wolf up close, to confirm she was real. One of the last to approach was the woman who'd spoken up at the council meeting, the mother whose daughter had died from suppression. I wanted to give you this, she said, holding out a small wooden carving. It was a wolf, white, carved with obvious care. I made it to remember my daughter, the woman continued. But I think you should have it, as a reminder of why you're fighting. Lyra took the carving, her throat tight. Thank you. No, thank you. The woman's eyes were wet. My daughter died believing she was weak, that she'd failed somehow. Because of you, other families won't have to live with that lie. The woman walked away before Lyra could respond. Lyra looked down at the carving, running her thumb over the smooth wood. It was simple, imperfect, human. She loved it. That night, as the celebration wound down and wolves headed home, Lyra stood at the edge of the settlement and looked up at the moon. The same moon that had witnessed her rejection at the ceremony. The same moon that had watched her grandmother die and her mother disappear. The same moon that had been indifferent to 70 years of suffering and lies. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight the moon didn't feel like a witness to humiliation. It felt like a witness to change. Lyra shifted into her white wolf form, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. Because she could. Because her strength was hers now, not something that could be taken away by poison or fear or the decisions of wolves who thought they knew better. She lifted her head and howled. It wasn't a cry of pain or loneliness. It was a declaration, a promise. I'm here, I survived, and I'm not going anywhere. Other wolves joined in, first David, then Elena, then others from the pack. The sound built and echoed across the territory, carrying into the forest and beyond. A song of survival, of resistance, of wolves who'd been broken and refused to stay that way. When the howling faded, Lyra shifted back to human form and walked toward the pack house, where Rowan was waiting with reports from other territories. There was work to do, always more work, more packs to investigate, more systems to dismantle, more wolves to protect from the kind of cruelty that had defined her early life. It was overwhelming, exhausting, sometimes terrifying, but it was hers. Lyra Vance, the girl who'd been rejected at a ceremony, who'd been poisoned her entire life, who'd been dismissed as weak and worthless, was now the voice for wolves who couldn't speak for themselves. The council member who could walk into any territory and demand answers. The white wolf who'd survived everything designed to destroy her. The queen nobody saw coming. And as she walked into the pack house to begin another long night of work, Lyra realized something that made her smile. She'd never wanted to be a queen, never wanted power or status or fear. She just wanted to matter, and now, standing on the other side of betrayal and poison and conspiracy, she finally did. Not because a king had chosen her, not because she'd become something she wasn't, but because she'd refused to accept the world as it was and fought to make it something better. That was power, the real kind, the kind that couldn't be stolen, suppressed, or destroyed, and Lyra was never letting it go.